to north from Mexico to this region. So what has been the issue? In the river, we've had flows when we shouldn't be having flows, and we have untreated sewage flowing north. And the flows in the river are a combination of treated wastewater in Mexico from 2 of the plants, untreated sewage from Tijuana, spring flows, and leaks from broken pipes. So if everything is working perfectly, normally we would be taking water out of the river and pumping it out so that there's no flow. But all of these infrastructure here had issues. And the issues started really becoming exacerbated in July of 2022, when there was a collapse of these 2 wastewater lines in Mexico. And so we had a reduction of infrastructure capacity. Now what you can see is this says complete, it's done. This says almost complete, it's going to be done within about a month. This says we have a temporary measure in place, but that means we are in construction. And this one, San Antonio de los Buenos in Mexico, is ongoing, and that's also almost complete. And I'll talk a little bit about that, okay? So things are moving and they are advancing. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so in this summer when things got really unbearable, really unbearable for the region, I was getting emails almost every day. And I read all of those emails and we responded to every single one of them. And so what I learned is that people really wanted to help. People were angry, but I also felt that it was important for them to see that we were doing something, but we were doing it on 4 key fronts. So one of the fact sheets that you got talks about these 4 key fronts. We were operating a federal facility owned by the federal government, not meeting federal law, and that's completely unacceptable. And like I mentioned, that wastewater treatment plant was in poor condition because of the lack of maintenance that had gone into it. So, and Emily will be talking about today is what we are doing. That plant now is meeting compliance. It's meeting the law now as of November. And what are we going to be doing to ensure it continues to meet the law? We invested about $25 million in that plant in the last year and a half. So a lot of investment, and we also built redundancy in that plant, okay? On the rehab and expansion, I'm gonna talk a little bit about what is going on with the funding, and how we're going, knowing the fact that we have full funding for the wastewater treatment plant, what are we gonna be able to achieve? Having full funding for the wastewater treatment plant is really beneficial because we no longer have to guess what we need to build. And so because of that, we have our consultants who I have directed to find certain things, 3 things. One is, how can we see incremental improvements fast? Okay, so right now it's 20 months of design and then 5 years of construction. We cannot wait for any sort of improvements at the end of construction. What can we do now, knowing we have the funding and we can sequence construction in a way that we no longer have to hedge our bets? And so that construction, I'll talk a little bit about what we're envisioning phase 1 to be so that we can get 0 transboundary flows in the river. The second thing, the other thing we're looking at that I've asked them to build into the plant is, now that we have full funding, is resiliency in this plant. So it's no longer vulnerable. It has the redundancies that it needs so that we can armor our plant and make sure that any sort of variable flows that we cannot control are addressed and will be able to be handled. And then the third thing that I've asked them to look at is accelerating the schedule. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about that. The other thing is, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening with minute 328. So what's a minute? The minute was an agreement that I negotiated. I signed it a year after I started in August of 2022. And it has commitments from Mexico on funding. They agreed to invest $144 million of infrastructure. That is a lot of money for Mexico. That would be the equivalent of 5 times that amount here, okay? Just because of the differences in cost of building things in Mexico. And so that is a lot of investment that will bring additional benefits. And in that, one of the main things is the wastewater treatment plant in Mexico. That wastewater treatment plant in Mexico has already been built. I was there last week. I witnessed it for myself, and they are now doing testing to ensure that treatment is well, basically they're stabilizing the treatment. In other words, they have to do some chemical processes, grow the bugs and all of that. So that is envisioned to be completed by the end of March, so that we will have now 17 million gallons per day of previously untreated sewage now being treated at that plant. So Mexico has really made some great strides, and so I want to recognize Mexico for that work. We do have an official here from the state of Baja California who's here to listen as well about how your community is being impacted. And then finally is, what are we doing with transboundary flows? Because we have to work on what is causing the transboundary flows, how we're going to solve them with our wastewater treatment plant, but we don't want to wait. We want to see what we can do now and what are some of the small improvements that will help to ensure to identify what the sources of those flows, like the stuff going on in the canyons, as well as to ensure that we're able to advance a good political narrative with the Mexican government. Okay. Let's go to the next slide, please. So Emily, repairs and compliance.
Good evening, I'm Emily Allen, the Area Operations Manager. So we're going to talk about compliance and how we maintain compliance. As the Commissioner mentioned, we had obtained compliance in November 2024, so just last year, and we continue having a compliance in December, and we're trending pretty well in January. Now the rain starts, that's where it's going to hit us. So I think, all of the things we need to do to keep that. So kind of talk about water quality compliance is depending on the value of the flow coming into the plant, and also talking about number of PFTs online. So PFT is primary sedimentation tank. So that's the primary stage of treatment, and our plant is a secondary treatment. So last year we spent a lot of time. All 5 PST have been rehabilitated, cleaned, and in operation status since January of this year. And 3 PSTs are minimum requirement for the permit. Now, what we do is that we have total 5. So we have a 2 on the side. Depends on the situation, we will adjust that to maintain the compliance of really looking at the water quality, whether it's too much flow or too much sediment, and then how we gonna reduce the work in the secondary treatment. So currently we have 3 PSTs online and 2 on standby. So because the rain we're gonna hit tonight, so we want to have less PSTs running, have a more chance of standing by just in case something happens. During the dry weather, what happens is we're leveraging the PV sealer. I think a lot of you heard about PV sealer. During the day is running, and then during the night offline. So offline is to manage the volume of flow. So peak flow is during the evening time. And when we request Mexico to shut down PV sealer pumps, 1 or 2, so that way we can stay within the 25 million gallons per day on average. Next slide, please. These are the things that we're doing constantly to action to maintain compliance. One of it is kind of talking about the balance. So when you have, if we don't have the rain, not a lot of flow, not a lot of sediment coming in, what we're trying to do is do more treatment during the primary and leave the secondary have to do less work. So that's why, you know, normal time we have a 4 PST online, 1 on standby, and proactively doing maintenance on the PSTs. So in case something happens, we always have something in operation status. So continue to treat. The other thing we're working on, the early work stopgap prior to the rehabilitation and expansion project. You know, these are the things that we are doing right now before any of the design, any of the work can be executed in the expansion project. So these are the things that we do right now to make sure we stay in compliance. We continue to work with progressive design build team and our operators team. They continue to communicate, looking at the key issues throughout the plan, identify some of the critical essential equipment that we need to replace now sooner than later. Some of the things that we might need to replace now because we have to keep compliance because we can't wait 3 to 5 years. So those are the things that we're kind of identifying and running. And currently we're modifying a few projects into the existing O&M contract, operation and maintenance contract, sorry about the acronyms. One is addressing the pump station, and the other one's the belt filter press. Those are kind of the address some of the sediment issues. Next slide, please. So junction box 1, that is where the entry of the sewage flow coming into our plant. The junction box 1, really, that is like the gatekeeper of our plant to protect us. The volume coming in to be able to regulate that junction box is very important for the volume. So project with water construction started in September, and while we're going completing the design process, project's going to be completed in August. The reason for August is the long lead item for the actual gate valve that are going to be put in place. So in the meantime, we installed a temporary plate at the existing junction box to stop the flow while during the heavy rain season. And we continue to adjust that to maintain the correct volume and flow coming to the plant. Next slide, please. So a lot of you definitely in this area experience kind of Hollister pump station multiple times in the last year, really since June of last year. We had a spill because the excessive sediment and trash hitting the pump station and knocking it out. So what happened is that after June, based on July's assessment inspection report on the pump station, one of the surge tank is not repairable. That's a small surge tank, and large one can temporarily repair it until the expansion project can totally replace it. We did an emergency contract with our O&M operation and maintenance contract, and to do the repair, and that's what September 16th that the pump station came online. During this, obviously we can see January 1st we had another spill. That is because one of the parts that we replaced in September had a malfunction valve. So because it was still under warranty, we were able to quickly get the replacement parts and then restore the pump station. So the January 23rd, it came back online. During this time, we continue to kind of look at all of the pump stations because the inspection at Hollister Pump, we also look at the GOATS pump station. As many of you in the area know that we have the similar issue at GOATS, but not as bad. The intent is to replace both pump stations at the same time. We discussed a lot of alternatives, kind of looking at when to replace it, what's the best time to replace it. Based on our progressive design team, kind of looking at analysis, the intent is to, in the future, will be bringing on new technology for the surge tank, a more efficient way and a better way of protecting from the surge and from the sediment. So those are the things that we were looking at. However, we kind of see multiple spills. We have decided to move forward now because we can't wait. We can't have another spill. because we don't have that backup. We don't have the second surge tank. So because of that, we are going to modify our existing operation maintenance contract to replace in kind. Replace in kind means that whatever was there before, we're going to replace the same thing, knowing that, you know, a few years down the line, we're going to have to replace it. But that will help us to prevent a future transboundary flow. Next slide, please. Here's kind of talk about the sediment issues. As many of you kind of received the notification regarding the spills, and you can see how it was impacted. January 23rd, right before we brought the pump station back online, we took the opportunity to clean out both canyon collectors, goats and smuggler. Of course, right after the weekend rain, the sediment just came in and knocked out all of the protection that we put in place. So those kind of situations we're kind of facing. So some of the actions that we're looking at is working closely with Mexico to looking at sediment solutions. And at the same time, we're looking on the US side, the sediment solutions at the Old Smuggler's Gulch collector. So there's another canyon collector on the other side of the existing one. So what we're going to do that is, this is really because the major construction is going on the Mexico side. That's where the major issue is at. So we want to prevent that for the future. And then the third thing that we kind of start to discuss is working closely, partnership with our Border Patrol. So based on our recent discussion with Border Patrol, they are doing the sediment and trash cleaning on the other side of the canyon collector, because the border gate needs to be raised and during the rain. And what happened is sediment and trash is blocking the gate, and they could damage the gate. So they are doing that already. So we want to partner with them to increase the cleaning, not just after the rain, but also before the rain, and a more recurring cleaning during the year. Next slide, please.
Okay, now let's talk about the second front, which is the rehab and expansion. Let's go to the next slide. So here are this presentation will be made available in the public. It'll be made available on our website. But here are some key dates that I want to highlight. One is that right now we have full project funding available. Okay. And I really want to thank the administration as well as members of Congress for advancing that and making that funds available to the IBWC. The other thing is that we envision, this is the critical timelines. 10% design is going to be done in February of this year, 30% in May. Now, why is that important? Because at the 30% design is where we will be able to lock in a level of pricing. We will have a schedule, and we will have a better idea as to how this project is going to be implemented. Design and construction is going to be done in parallel, and we envision highlighting that with the public come June. Other things that are going on is that we're going to be working in parallel in construction in these three types of work. And right now, our choke point at the plant is what we call in the headworks, the grit facility. So now that we no longer have to hedge our beds, we are looking at identifying the choke points that will allow us to increase our plant by 10 million gallons per day. And I'll talk a little bit about that. The other thing is we keep talking about long lead items. We can't go to Lowe's and buy a 96-inch valve. It has to be sourced, it has to be made, it has to be shipped. So it takes time for that. So if we're able to start ordering equipment so that it gets here in parallel with design and construction, that is also going to save us time. Let's go to the next slide, please. So I've talked a little bit about what are the benefits that we're seeing right now that we have full funding. We don't have to hedge our bets. We minimize construction delays or no construction delays because of lack of funding. We're able to start looking at the resiliency in the plant and eliminate the bottlenecks. The idea is to have about 10 MGD, million gallons per day identified so that we can start taking water out of the river earlier. Last summer, that was our challenge, is that we had consistently through the summer 5 to 7 million gallons per day of flows in the river. Now, those flows are a combination of sewage and water, treated effluent and spring water, but we want to have no flow in the river. And so that's why now that we have full funding, we can actually do incremental improvements where a first phase will be 10 million gallons per day. When I will have more information on that come June, because right now, because we had full funding in the 10% design, all of these elements can be integrated, and the 30% design that will be done in May will have that all laid out for us as well as a schedule. Let's go to the next one. So this is what we're anticipating to update in June, a ceiling price, well, it's not on here, but a schedule, and also a plan for incremental increases at our primary, at our facilities so that we can get water out of the river and not wait until the end of construction 5 years later. Let's go to the next slide, please. So I'm just, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go to the last couple of slides very quickly. Okay, so our third front, minute 328. Let's go to the next slide. So we have a QR code where you can look at what the status is of all of Mexico's commitments. The QR code is also on the fact sheet. And you can use that QR code to see what's been completed, what's under construction, and still what's in planning. And one of the things that's almost going to be completed is going to be that wastewater treatment plant in Mexico that will be treating 17 million gallons per day. That's right here. It's in yellow, but it should be done. It's expected to be done and in full operation. The construction is done right now. It's under testing. By April of 2025, it should be in full operation. Let's go to the next one. Can somebody go to the next slide, please? Okay, transboundary flows. I talked about our fourth front. What are we doing to get our arms around transboundary flows? Next one, please. So there's only 2 more slides. And so what we are doing now is that we are doing a daily review of flows. We have sensors that are up and running. We're also doing a mass balance, looking at all the different sources. Bi-weekly local binational meetings that both Emily is having and I'm having with my Mexican counterpart to identify any issues, coordinate actions, ongoing projects. And then the other thing is monthly river inspections. Our staff is going out there on a monthly basis. It started in September to identify where those points are along the river where we're seeing increased flows. Why is that important? Because then we can identify the projects that are needed to make the repairs so those leaks are no longer there. Let's go to the next one. This is an example of what we use to detect anomalies. So when we have this is San Antonio de los Buenos, their target is 50 MGD, million gallons per day. This is our plant. Our target is 25. This is transboundary flows. This is in January, but in the summer, our target is 0. So these are the tools that we use to see if there's any anomalies, right? Here we saw an anomaly and there was an issue with our sensors, right? And so what we're envisioning, if you go to the next slide, is having this dashboard that will tell people how much our flow is coming in our plant, how much is going to the Mexican coast, how much is being picked up at the river, and how much is flowing into the estuary, right, or crossing the border. So this is what we want to put up so that data is available to the public. And I think that's our last slide. Yes, the last slide.
All right, I would like, before we ask questions, I would like to introduce the board members who came in. And we have Leon Benham right here. Leon, he lives right on the estuary. And then we have Mayor John Duncan from the city of Coronado. And we have Mary Johnson Powell from the Tijuana River Valley Equestrian Society. So I think we have time for some questions, and I had an idea that we can, oh yeah, question from the board members first. Ed, why don't you take this one? Sure.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the presentation, very complete. Sort of zooming out to the bigger picture. In the past, we haven't had the greatest cooperation with Mexico on getting things repaired quickly, getting access to information, any number of things. How would you characterize the relationship now with the authorities directly involved in these projects in Mexico? And how confident are you that what is being said, especially like San Antonio de los Buenos and other projects, are going to be completed as promised?
So I started more or less when the new governor of Baja California started at the same time in 2021. This governor, Marina del Pilar, has been nothing but transparent. Anytime we've asked for a meeting, they've given us their time and their information. So that transparency is definitely there. The willingness to invest and promote within her government that investment is something I see on a regular basis. And how do I see that? Because we have monthly meetings. We had monthly meetings with them, and we report on how the IBWC is advancing as well as how they are advancing. We also have periodic high-level meetings where at the ambassador level, where we've had meetings in Mexico City and very high-level ranking officials with again, that they show results. Now, we are in the middle of the five-year, it's a 5-year minute. And so right now, Mexico has obtained about 40% of their funding. And so we continue to advocate for Mexico's additional funding so that they can meet their 5-year deadline. Is that helpful?
Any more questions from the board? From Mayor Duncan.
Thank you. I appreciate your question and your answer, because frankly, everything you just said that was actually, in my opinion, happening with Mexico when they told us that plant was going to come online before October 1st, and then it didn't happen. So I think what you were sharing with us earlier today is that you have a higher level of confidence now that it will be up and running by April 1st. Is that the deadline? Okay. I hope at our next meeting that is the case. Yeah.
So we are actually, and Mayor Duncan, when he was city council member, actually had the opportunity to visit the plant when it was in construction, and we're envisioning, we talked to the state of Baja California of doing the same meeting again to take federal officials as well as locally elected officials to go and see the plant for themselves so that those discussions could be had. So that's one of the things we talked about. The second thing, as you may recall, at a meeting I was in Imperial Beach, and Mitch McKay was at that meeting that I was there. A state official said they were going to finish by October, and I said, no, you're not. And he owes me a very expensive dinner. He owes me a very expensive dinner because I knew they weren't going to achieve it. But they did finish a year earlier than expected overall. Okay. And so I think we're in good shape with what they are doing. He still owes me dinner. With what we are doing, what Mexico is doing to get that done on time.
Yeah, I thought he was going to buy dinner for all of us. Is that right? Okay. Any more board member have a question? Okay, question from the audience then. So I think, Emily, will you take this microphone back? And what we'll do is we'll repeat the question up here. We also have questions online. Frankie, do we have questions from a board member online? Okay, we'll see those questions next. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. But answering just a lot of on a very challenging place to work, no matter how much money you have. So I really appreciate seeing the money. The US Citizens had an earthquake program for decades, and it became popular to the public when we had an app that could tell you there's an earthquake within seconds of it being monitored. Is there part of a timely, not just the dashboard, which I appreciate, but is there something in place to be a timely warning for beach closures? Like in minutes or within an hour? Thank you.
First, I want to see, did the folks online hear that? Richard, could you hear that question? You're
Yes, I
muted,
did. I can hear
Richard.
it. Yeah.
You could hear it, okay. So we'll give the mic to Dr. Elena.
I don't think I can answer your question about whether if on the beach closures, that's kind of out of Arlene. I'm assuming the county is one that advances that tracking, and maybe and you guys don't have any comments either. Okay, so maybe that's something to, yes.
She can.
Are you with the county? Okay, so there's a website that has the beach closures on there. Okay, thank you. So just to repeat for those that are online, there is a website of somebody, if you could provide it to Frankie and he could put it in the chat so that they can see it. Yeah. Oh, well.
So the SBO alcohol is currently tested using a test method called the NPN test, which was replaced about 2 years ago with a testing method called the DDCPR. And where it seems like that with the SBO putting out millions of gallons of fecal solid, which has DNA in it. Now, it's not active DNA, it's pretty much sterilized and broken up. But the beach closures, so the NPN test works out there because it actually looks for the diseases that will harm us. However, the beach is closed by the testing method of the ddPCR. And so the fecal solids is directly related to beach closure because of that testing method. And so many people have discussed before about bringing together and using the same test method that will close our beaches with what's going on in the SBOO. And that's a real concern for a lot of us. And I don't expect an answer because this is a very kind of a deep study, but in essence, there's a double standard where, you know, that's happening. And I think many people want that addressed at some point.
Yeah, I know we don't spend a lot of time on it, but that ddPCR test for the pilot program is used in a very narrow part of this entire country, which is the coastal beach for Ottawa coast. So if the county wants to talk about it, I'm interested, but if it's a pilot program, when's it going to end? When is there going to be another study? And if it's no longer a pilot program, and if it's the best means of testing, why isn't it used on all the coasts of the United States for testing instead of solely in Southern California, as far as the beaches?
And I'd really, are you going to address that? Because just quickly.
If you'd like me to, I can quickly, or
Okay.
we could. I'll just say very quickly that ddPCR is not utilized to close the beaches. That's done strictly based on observations of contamination, such as a sewage flow. ddPCR is tested daily, and those that threshold that was approved by the USIBWC and the California Department of Public Health is used to issue advisories. It's also used to reopen the beaches when it comes back into that threshold. And regarding the pilot, there was a 2-year-long study that was conducted prior to the methodology being approved by the US EPA and CDPH. And so it was no longer a pilot study after it was approved and implemented. So there is a PCR that is used elsewhere throughout the country in Maryland and up the Great Lakes. So it was qPCR, this is ddPCR, but PCR is a well-known method to test
recreational waters. And so this was the first in California.
Let's move on and let's take a couple questions from the online folks first. And we also have to keep moving on our agenda. We have public comment also at the end of the meeting. So I see a question here is, Frankie, there was a couple questions below that were on there before. Can you back it up a little bit? In the yellow. Okay, go ahead, Ramon. Chaides. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, first and foremost, I just want to thank Commissioner Giner for doing this, and I'm glad to see you still here. That's a very good sign, and we're hoping that you stay on. And just for those that don't know me, I'm the Director of Education and Environmental Advocacy for an organization called Un Mar de Colores. And my question has to do with clarifying a little bit about the river itself, because we know that what's coming through the channel, and then that flows into the river through some of the culverts on Saturn, through the estuary now into the ocean. The understanding that we have is that that river flow is not being treated, at least not once it crosses the border. And so, Commissioner, can you give us a little bit more clarification as to when you say that you're going to be able to extract 5 to 10 million gallons a day of some river flow? Are you saying specifically that's going to come out of the river? Or is that still going to remain untreatable transboundary flow that will not end up in any treatment facility?
Okay, so last summer we had an issue of having, during the summer, there should be zero flow in the river. And so last summer, we really had a difficult time of capturing 5 to 7 million gallons per day of flow in that river. So the idea is the first incremental improvement of the wastewater treatment plant is to start off by adding quickly. Now, quickly is not a week, it's not a month. I'll be able to tell you what that is in June, but additional 10 MGD, million gallons per day of flow from the river into our plant. So that's one thing. The other thing that we're also doing is that when we're envisioning building this new plant, of looking at oversizing part of the capacity so that during rainy periods, we can take more of the flows in the plant. That will be towards the end of the construction, okay? We are working with the regional board on that. We still have to meet water quality requirements. We will blend the water at the end, but the idea is to be able to take more flow. That's the second thing. The third thing is because of the public's request, we are doing a study to look at an additional infrastructure that can take possibly all the flow in the river, even during the rainy season. Now, the federal government does not take on new infrastructure itself. This will be a study that was a request of the cities and of the NGOs wanting to know what it would take, and that's called a Tijuana River Diversion Facility. That will be something that they will need, that community will need to pursue based on this study that we're getting proposals, and hopefully we'll be able to start in March, so that communities can pursue a path on additional infrastructure should they choose to do that.
So what I'm
Does
being
that
told,
answer your question?
yes, so what I'm being told by some EPA officials is that the best place to divert some of that flow is in Tijuana versus actually having to cross and then treating it on the American side. Just wanted to get your take on that.
That is correct. And so one of the projects that is in minute 328 is taking the treated effluent from 2 wastewater treatment plants that they have in Tijuana that discharges into the river, taking it to the reservoir, Abelardo Rodriguez, and then being put to potable use. And so that continues to be a priority for the state as well as for EPA.
Okay, I'm gonna
Thank you.
actually move on with
Thank
the
you,
agenda.
Commissioner.
We can take some more questions at the end of the meeting. And so actually I'm up to speak. And I had a very short presentation to just memorialize a little tour we had day before yesterday that some of us on the board and also some officials from politicians in the county and the Regional Water Quality Control Board, we attended a tour of the San Diego Ocean Monitoring Program over there at NTC area. So you want to go ahead and start marching through these slides for me? So we had a great tour. It's an amazing facility, a lot of very advanced basic science going on with some high-tech stuff. It was kind of over a lot of our heads, but it was really interesting what they do to test the sediment, and they test for what critters can live in it. If they don't live, 10 days of time in sediment to see if they live. Go ahead to the next slide. This was called a CTD probe that was shown to us. This is one that goes down to the 39 sites. Is that correct? 39 different sites where you pull water out of the water, más o menos. And so it has these chambers that open depending on the depth, and it gathers water for testing, measures all sorts of things that I'm sure that Dr. Kempster will tell you in a little bit. Next slide. So this was fascinating to me. It looks like you could surf underwater with that scan fish. So it's an underwater wing that they tow that can be controlled to go up and down, and also does oceanographic survey as they tow it. Next slide. So this is a real-time oceanographic mooring device. Now the screen doesn't go with it down into the ocean, right? So anyway, there are two of these, one on each outfall, the South Bay Ocean outfall and the Point Loma outfall. And in real time, you can see all sorts of data that's going on at the outfall. And the great thing about it is you don't have to go get it and collect data from it. Next slide. And so this is getting some more information about how this can be down there for quite a long time, but they're getting the data constantly. So this is a huge advance over the old technology where they'd have to retrieve the instrument, take the chip out of it, download it, and analyze it. Next slide. And so they also have equipment to retrieve tools and devices that fall or get fall out of their containers. So they can remote control and pick things up and retrieve them. Next slide. So this is what's called a Van Veen grab, and it catches the sediment from the bottom of the ocean, and then they can take it to the lab and analyze it many ways. Continue. Next slide. This was we had a little lecture on benthos, the Greek word, which both means the bottom life, the life of the bottom of the ocean, and plus the sediment that it lives in. And a lot of information can be discovered by studying the life on the bottom of the ocean and how it changes over time. So this program has been going on for decades, and they're tracking the animals and how the abundance and the diversity of different creatures in the sediment. Next slide. This Ricardo was showing us all these samples of when they analyzed the little tiny creatures in the sediment. And he said, one of the quote that he said to us was, takes 5 years to train a worm taxonomist. So these are very highly trained people. And by the way, they were so enthusiastic and articulate about their work. Next slide. Okay, this is Brian Santos. We went upstairs, and this is where they do the testing for the bacteria. They culture the water and see how much bacteria grows, 3 different types. Next slide. And so this is the fecal indicator bacteria in culture. So we were taught that this bacteria, they call it indicator bacteria because these bacteria don't necessarily cause disease. They indicate that there might be other things in the water that would cause disease, especially viruses. Next slide. I guess that's it. That's my presentation. All right, I don't think we need any questions about my presentation, so we can move right on to Dr. Brian Kempster. And he is the head of the Ocean Monitoring Program Manager. And What I like about Ryan is every time I send him an email on the wrong day, I get email message back that says, I'm in the water. Not today.
Great. Thank you, Brian. And thank you all for being here this evening. Hopefully we'll be able to share some, hopefully you can hear me. Hopefully we can share some new insights with you about our program and exactly what we do with the ocean monitoring program, maybe what we don't do with the ocean monitoring program. The next slide. Just by way of introduction, I've been involved in the field of marine science for 20 years now. I've had the opportunity to work all over the world in various monitoring programs, conservation programs, and I found myself here in San Diego about 6 years ago now. And despite my experience working in the field of marine science, my experience is but a fraction of what is made up of my team members. If we go to the next slide. I am very fortunate that I get to work with this wonderful group of people. We have about 20, I think we're about 22 marine biologists in our team that help run the ocean monitoring program, and collectively experience in the decades here in San Diego specifically running this program. In fact, we have our team members sitting at the front here, some of which have been with the city for over 30 years. So I have much experience with the collection of this data and understanding of the data that we collect. And we ourselves are but a small part of a bigger program. If we go to the next slide, we make up the Environmental Monitoring and Technical Services Division, of which there are over 200 staff of scientific and technical staff that look at all aspects of water quality, whether that's drinking water, wastewater. And we benefit from the fact that we have in-house chemistry labs, microbiology labs, molecular labs that we're able to take the samples that we collect out in the ocean and send to the various experts around the city to process those samples for us. Because as you will probably already realize, and certainly come to realize through the presentation, that there's a lot of data that we collect, and it's extremely varied, and there's no way one person could possibly know everything about every single aspect of the data collection. And so it really takes a team such as this of 200 plus people to really have the expertise to be able to collect, process, and actually understand that data. So go to the next slide, please. Okay, so what is the Ocean Monitoring Program? So the Ocean Monitoring Program is a permit compliance program designed to assess the impact of discharging treated wastewater into the coastal waters of San Diego. And I really want to stress the permit compliance program. And we're going to get into that a little bit more in a moment, because I think there is possibly some confusion about exactly what we do and the types of data we collect. So just go to the next slide. So you can skip through these, and I'll talk through it as you go through it. So just by way of background, this really kind of began with the Federal Water Pollution Control Act, which is really one of the first major water pollution laws in the US, which later became what we know today as the Clean Water Act. This became the basis of NPDES permit requirements. So NPDES permits, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits, which form the basis of waste discharge requirements. So for a treatment facility that's discharging to US waters, they have certain waste requirements that they have to comply with to ensure that they're meeting standards to safely discharge that water. This is administered by the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And essentially, if you fall out of compliance with the requirements set by the Regional Water Quality Control Board, you're potentially on the hook for huge fines for until you then fall back into compliance. So next slide. So in terms of everything I'm going to share with you today, this is but a tiny snapshot of the program as a whole. But something that I really wanted to stress is the fact that we don't get to decide where we sample, what we sample, how frequently we sample. This is completely determined by the permits that the treatment plants are under, and these are determined by the Regional Water Quality Control Board in conjunction with EPA. And so the reason I'm putting this up here is that if you have interest in what we do and exactly how we do it, there is literally a recipe book online that tells you every single excruciating little detail of what we do and how we do it. And so if you're interested in the South Bay International Water Treatment Plant, the ocean monitoring that goes on there, literally Google NPDES, South Bay International Treatment Plant, and you will find this NPDES permit. And if you just scoot to the next one, This is going to detail exactly what the requirements are for the treatment plan, what they are required to do to maintain compliance with discharging into the Pacific Ocean. The next one. And specifically, if you really want to get into the details, attachment E, that's the monitoring program. That's specific to what we do and how our program is built around these specific requirements. And next slide. So it's specific to the sampling locations, tells you exactly where we have to sample, and then one more. And then specific to the actual parameters that we're collecting, the frequency of that collection, when and where that occurs. So I just really wanted to highlight this because I think sometimes people are a little bit confused when we talk about an ocean monitoring program. You might think this is much bigger and broader than it is, and we'll get to the specifics of the nature of the program. But if you do have specific questions about aspects of the monitoring, it is all right here. So next slide. So by way of kind of an overview of the program and kind of the basis for the program, it really revolves around these three treatment facilities. So that's the Point Loma Wastewater Treatment Plant, the South Bay Water Reclamation Plant, both owned and operated by the City of San Diego, and then the South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant, which is obviously federally owned. Now, the reason the City of San Diego is doing the monitoring for the South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant is because we actually commingle waste through the South Bay Ocean outfall. So the South Bay Water Reclamation Plant and the International Treatment Plant both send their discharge through the same outfall. So essentially what that means is the NPDES permit requirements for the reclamation plant and the treatment plant, they're the same. So we, the city, we were already conducting a monitoring program all the way back to the 60s in the Point Loma region. We had a full monitoring program around the Point Loma Ocean outfall for that treatment facility. When the South Bay Reclamation Plant was coming online, we expanded our monitoring into the South Bay, and that monitoring would be the same as the requirements that were set for the International Treatment Plant. And so we were already there doing the monitoring, so it made sense for the treatment plant to work with us. And so they essentially contract that work out for us, and then we provide all the data and the reports to the treatment plant to ensure that they maintain compliance with their NPDES permit requirements. But just by way of reference, out of the South Bay Ocean outfall, it's about 30 million gallons discharged per day, and almost 90% of that comes from the International Treatment Plant. So the city's contribution to that commingled waste is around 10% or so out of the South Bay. Up in the Point Loma region, you can see the stark difference in the discharge. Point Loma discharge is about 150 million gallons per day, so about 5 times the amount of discharge that comes out of the South Bay Ocean outfall. And Point Loma is an advanced primary treatment facility. They're effectively working at a treatment level of equivalency to secondary treatment, which is what the South Bay operates at. But it is technically a lesser degree of treatment than in the South Bay, but they're processing much more water. And just a little bit of history before we move on, you'll see the 2.5 mile marker there. The Point Loma treatment plant was actually extended in the 90s. And this was really kind of a credit to the monitoring program because it was essentially determined at that point the bacterial levels around the outfall were not favorable for recreational waters with the outfall as it currently was at 2.5 miles offshore. And so a determination was made that by extending that outfall, not only further offshore, but actually into deeper water, it would actually help improve that situation. And that's exactly what it did. And as we'll get into in a moment, when we get into some of the data, you'll see the stark contrast between Point Loma and the South Bay and how that discharge affects the wider community. So if we jump to the next slide. So this is just kind of a brief overview of the nature of the monitoring program. It's kind of broken down into three primary areas, which we kind of call our core monitoring. Water quality is really kind of our bread and butter. Monitoring is something we do weekly, we do quarterly, depending on the locations. Some are sampled weekly, some are sampled quarterly. Benthic habitats, this is looking at the sediment, so the composition of that sediment, any contaminants in the sediment, the critters themselves, so the actual organisms living in the sediment. And then the trawl and rig fishing, looking more at your larger mobile fish, and looking at specifically contaminants in those fish as well, in the muscle and liver tissues of those fish. And just to kind of reiterate the point that I mentioned in regards to the permit, these sample locations, they're specifically dictated by the permit. And the main goal or emphasis is to look at the near and far side effects of the outfall. So essentially, what is the effect close to the outfall and what is the effect far from the outfall? Because the entire basis of our monitoring program is to determine exactly that. It's not just to broadly monitor the entire coastline and see what things look like. It's to answer the question, is the outfall having a specific negative effect on the environment? And so the sampling sites were at the beginning of the program and in consultation with the regional board and EPA determined to answer those questions. Next slide. So every 2 years, we produce a biannual report which summarizes all of the data collection from our program. This report ends up being in the realms of 1,000 pages of data analysis. It's a big program. It's a lot of information. This is available on our website. It'll give you probably way more information than you would ever like to know about our monitoring program, but it is there. It's available. And this is just kind of a brief breakdown in the components of the report that I'm going to touch on today. But of course, as I mentioned, the program is just so vast, I couldn't possibly get into every single detail today. So we'll try and cover most of it and give you a good sense of kind of what we see. Next slide. All right, so before you hit that next button, because I think it's going to start the video, just before we kind of jump into each section, the last time I presented to this group, I remember speaking to Morgan at the time, and one of the things we talked about that was really kind of missing was kind of capturing what it's actually like to be out there collecting data, working on the ocean. The ocean's a very challenging place to work. We're out there 200 days a year collecting data, whether it's fish, sediments, water samples. A week like this week, when the weather's blowing up, it's incredibly difficult to get out. It's just a very challenging environment to work in. And so in conversations with Morgan, we said it'd be really nice at the future Citizens Forum if we can actually put some videos in there and really kind of get a sense of what it looks like to do this work. So I'm going to be quiet for a second. We're going to play this. Hopefully the volume will work okay, and I'll step out for a second. Technical difficulties. We'll get it going. Give us just a second. No. Okay. If you want to play it, I can just talk over it. Okay, so we're not going to have the volume, but I can talk over it and just kind of describe what's going on. So this is just some footage of our boat, the Oceanus, heading out, and it's just going to give you a sense of kind of what it's like out there collecting water samples. So this device that you see the picture of and what you're seeing being deployed off the back right now, this is a CTD. So this is a conductivity, temperature, and depth device. And this essentially has a whole host of sensors built into it. So as we're going up and down in the water column, we can collect data, whether it's pH, salinity, temperature, dissolved oxygen, a whole host of different parameters that will help us characterize the ocean and better understand kind of exactly what's going on with the dynamics in the water, which then help us with the actual water samples themselves. So it's got these what we call rosettes built into it, and this will actually collect water samples at different depths throughout the water column. And so we then can bring those samples back to the lab. They get analyzed by our microbiology lab, and that will tell us what the levels of fecal indicator bacteria are in the water column. And of course, we can look at that, compare that to what we're seeing in the ocean parameters, and we can start to better understand what's happening out there, what's causing certain impacts, why are we seeing high levels of fecal indicator bacteria in a certain location at a certain depth. What does that mean? And so this is really the kind of, as I mentioned, kind of bread and butter of our sampling. This is something we're doing every week. But as will likely come up in conversation, it's different to what the county does. So coming back to the purpose of the program is to assess the effects of the outfall. We're not out there testing beaches to determine how healthy is it for you to go swimming out on that beach tomorrow. We're out there to determine, are there any long-term impacts from discharging this waste from the outfall? So if we go to the next slide. So just coming back to kind of understanding ocean conditions, this is really the kind of the starting point of really understanding the nature of any of the data we collect in the program. And so I wanted to show this just as an example of some of the data we collect. Again, this is a tiny snapshot, but this is looking at temperature in the Point Loma and the South Bay regions. And one of the interesting things that you see here is that in the San Diego region, we have this strong upwelling in the springtime. So you get this cold water coming up from deep, and it causes this stratification in the water column. And what we mean by that, so here in the kind of spring, summer, you see this warmer water on top with this pool of colder water in the bottom. And this is really important when it comes to plume dynamics. So in terms of the actual outfall plume, and we're going to touch on that in a moment. But the take-home message here is, if you look at how distinct the line is in Point Loma, you have this big body of cold water, real warm, like slither of warm water on top. In the South Bay, it's not as pronounced. So that mixing is not as pronounced as Point Loma. And that's essentially a depth characteristic. In Point Loma, it's much deeper. You've got all this cold water that's coming up over the outfall. In South Bay, it's much shallower. So it's harder to get that distinct thermocline. And then when you move into the winter months, it becomes even more apparent that in the Point Loma region, you've still got some of the thermocline. In the South Bay, it's much more mixed. And again, we'll touch on this in a minute when we get into the plume dynamics of why that is important. Next. So another thing that we're keenly interested in is the directionality of water currents. So, you know, we can look at these things that tell us a little bit about stratification in the water column and things that might affect where the plume might be able to go in terms of the vertical aspects of the water. But what about actually movement along the coast? Well, it's a little hard to see in here, but these arrows essentially are looking at the general trends in ocean currents in the region at the end of the outfall. So we have moorings positioned at the end of the outfalls that are constantly monitoring various parameters, including ocean currents. And essentially what we find is there's a major current in this northwest southeast direction. And so when you go out to the ends of the outfalls, the plume is essentially being driven in those directions. So it's kind of either the southeast, northwest direction. And when we get to talking about the plume discharge itself, you then start to understand, well, we've got this alongshore movement of the plume, and we've got somewhat of a trapping of the plume because of the stratification, and it starts to really build a picture of what happens to that discharge when it leaves the outfall. Let's move into the next slide. So then we come into water quality, and I don't think it needs much explanation to see the difference between these two graphs. Bottom is South Bay, top is Point Loma. I won't go into too much detail here. I think it mostly kind of speaks to itself. Essentially what you're looking at is elevated fecal indicator bacteria in the two regions. The scales are the same. So basically what you're looking at is in South Bay, we obviously have high-end fecal indicator bacteria. In Point Loma, it's kind of a blip, you know, there's really not much there. And so this will obviously come as no surprise to any of you here. We obviously have contamination issues in the South Bay, and that is very apparent here. There's somewhat of a trend with rainfall. When we see more rain, we see more runoff through the rivers, we see more contamination. And so the blue lines essentially indicate the wet season, the red, the dry season. And so you see the difference with the potential for contamination between wet and dry season. So go to the next slide. So it's a little washed out. It's a bit hard to see this, but this is just the South Bay. So this is now broken down a little bit further to help understand the situation a little bit more. So we've essentially got along the shore, near shore, and offshore. And this red box here indicates the most recent reporting cycle. So there's a lot to unpack in this figure. So I'll try and just kind of point out a few things for you of interest. So this first line is essentially when the South Bay outfall became operational. So you'll see, if you look at the offshore, this is essentially where the outfall is discharging. You see an uptick in the fecal indicator bacteria. So maybe not too surprising. You've now just started discharging off the coast. And so we're seeing an impact from that discharge off the coast. But we don't really see any difference in the near shore and shore samples. So we're essentially seeing that effect at the outfall, but not beyond the outfall. Move forward to, I think it's 2011, I want to say, when secondary treatment happened, and you get an immediate drop-off in that fecal indicator bacteria. So the secondary treatment at the treatment plant got rid of this effect offshore. And again, we've still got the effects at near shore, still got the effects at the shore. So essentially, we're seeing the impacts of the treatment process at the outfall site where that discharge is coming out. Now, where it gets interesting is once you start getting to 2017 or so, you just see this dramatic upshift at the nearshore sites, nearshore and shore sites, not at the outfall. So the outfall has stayed consistent. The discharge from the outfall has been consistent. We're seeing the same results in that region. Nearshore and shore, we're seeing a dramatic decline in water quality, and obviously we know through all the contamination issues we're seeing at the shore, it's obviously driving that situation. And then just to point out right here, the outfall, the last couple of years within this report cycle, we did see a little uptick in the bacteria at the outfall. Now, when I saw this, when my team saw this, it was actually a really good indication that the program we're conducting is doing the exact job it's supposed to do. We saw this uptick before we ever heard anything from the IBWC about issues at the plant. So what did we do? We saw this, we immediately went to the IBWC and said, we're getting weird data from the outfall. It's showing an uptick in bacteria. Is anything going on? And then I got the whole history of in 2022, the issues at the plant, what was going on, and it fully explained the issues here. Now, of course, fortunately, we're seeing 2023 and 2024, we're seeing that coming back down. But it's a really good indication of how well the treatment process is working at the current levels, the current discharge. Next slide. All right, so moving on to the plume tracking. So you can go ahead and just play the video if the sound's not working, I'll talk over it. I don't actually know what I was saying there, so I'll wait until something interesting comes on. But this is essentially our plume tracking program using our real-time oceanographic moorings. So we have one of these moorings positioned at the end of each outfall, one in Point Loma, one in South Bay. You get a sense from the images, just the size of this equipment. And now this is just the mooring that sits on the surface. So in Point Loma, this sits just up the end of the outfall, goes all the way down 300 feet to the seabed, has a series of sensors all the way down to the seabed, collecting a whole range of oceanographic parameters. One, to characterize ocean conditions. Two, to send that data in real time. Because the alternative is you go, you put a sensor out in the ocean, you leave it for 6 months, and when you go back, one, you hope it's still there. And if you are able to retrieve it, you hope you can get the data from it. These send data in real time. So they're constantly sending data to us. We have a website we can go to, see that data in real time. It's a website you can also go to yourself. And so at the end of the presentation, I will show you how to do that. And so you can see what are ocean currents doing at the end of the outfall? What's the temperature at the end of the outfall? You can get all of this information in real time. And so these have been really beneficial in really determining what's happening with that plume. We see the plume in this, so as that plume kind of moves around, depending on the specific season or what's going on at the time, we see it appear on the outfall, the depth, where it's moving, how fast it's going, those kind of things. Next slide. And so this is some of the data that we can get from instruments like this to actually determine where exactly the plume is. So on the left, you're looking at Point Loma, on the right, you're looking at South Bay. The reason why on the left it's such a bigger signature, well, Point Loma is 150 million gallons a day, South Bay 30 million gallons a day. It's a little easier to see the plume in Point Loma when you put in sensors in that to actually characterize that plume as opposed to the South Bay. But essentially, the take-home message from here is we're looking at the depth of the plume. So in the Point Loma region, we basically never see the plume surfacing higher than about 34 meters. So it basically never comes to the surface. It's always maintained down at least at a depth of 34, if not deeper. In the South Bay, a little bit of a different story. Typically, we see the plume not rise above about 10 meters. However, for portions of the year, it will come up all the way to the surface. And that comes back to what I was talking about that stratification in the water column. So in the wintertime, when the water is much more mixed, that plume is going to come right up to the surface. In the summertime, when you're getting a bit more of that stratification, it's going to kind of block that plume from actually rising all the way to the surface. Next slide. And so as well as data collection in the field, we can also use satellite imagery just to help visualize this. We contract with a separate company who provides satellite imagery for us. We don't do any data collection from the satellite imagery. It really is just for the imagery, so we can actually see what we're talking about. You know, we're collecting all this data, we're seeing where the plume is, what depth it is, what direction it's moving. We have all this information. And so when you can take that information and put a picture to it, it just really helps to understand what's going on. And so here in Point Loma, as I pointed out, there's basically never anything to see. The plume is down below the surface, we can't see it, and through years and years, we've been collecting satellite images for over 20 years, never seen it in Point Loma. South Bay, on the other hand, as I said, in the wintertime, you're going to see it in the winter, and this is kind of typical of what we might see with this southeastward direction of the plume. It does on occasion go northwards, might even go offshore, but one of the key things that we see with this, we don't see it coming inshore. Next slide. All right, so that's water quality, plume tracking. How are we on time? Am I? Are we in any rush order? Are we good? Okay, I'll try and fly through. Okay, so benthic conditions. So you can go ahead and play the video. So this is now looking at the sediment, what lives in the sediment, because with water quality is very transient. You may have terrible water quality today, but the ocean has an amazing ability to dilute contaminants, move contaminants. So tomorrow the water quality might be great. In the sediments, this is where you're going to see more of those long-term impacts. So if we're getting contaminant buildup in the sediments, it's going to stick around and it's going to have a long-lasting effect. And so we want to know, okay, well, what's happening around the region? And so we use this device, Van Bean grab, big ice cream scoop, basically. You drop it on the seabed, it scoops up a bunch of sand, bring it up, and we can analyze that for the organisms, chemical contaminants, or otherwise. You can go to the next slide. And so one of the things we look at is something called the benthic response index. And so we essentially collect all the animals in that sediment. We look at every single animal, we identify them, we classify them into their species groups, look at how many there are, how evenly they're spread, diversity. We bring all this information together, and essentially this comes together to form this benthic response index. And in a nutshell, what that essentially tells us is that community that you found representative of a healthy environment? Is that what we would expect to see based on the composition of the sand, the type of environment? And then we can rank this according to, yep, this is basically what we would expect. Actually, there's some deviation from what we would expect, which might imply some kind of pollution, or there's major degradation. And essentially, Point Loma, all the way back to the early 90s, maybe slight incline here, but pretty much flat for the last 20 or so years, really no change in that benthic response, which is telling us in the Point Loma region, there's no long-term impact from the discharge of the waste from the Point Loma outfall on the benthic communities that live around the outfall. And in the South Bay, the story is even simpler. So it's just a straight line all the way across. There's really no change in those benthic communities. Now, I do want to add with this and clarify, again, coming back to this point, the purpose of the program is to assess the effect of the outfall. We are not necessarily collecting animals up in the Tijuana River or at the mouth of the Tijuana River or right along the shore in IB. Our sampling sites are a little bit more off from the shore. And so this is indicative of impacts from the outfall, not necessarily indicative of impacts from the Tijuana River or sources inshore. Next slide. And so we have a number of other elements that we bring into this in terms of sediment quality, sediment toxicity. Just quickly, sediment quality, we're looking at the chemical composition of the sediment and the actual makeup of the sediment itself. So it's one thing to say that there are chemicals in the sediment, but it's another thing to say that those chemicals are toxic to the animals that live there. And so we do find a whole series of chemicals in the sediment, but is that indicative of an effect from the outfall, or is that just a region-wide thing? And it's generally just a region-wide thing. It's stuff we see throughout California. And so generally in this region, we're looking at minimal exposure to low exposure. And then when it comes to sediment toxicity, we want to see, okay, well now if we take that sediment, put it in a jar and put some very sensitive little critters in that jar, what happens to them? If that's a toxic environment with chemical contaminants, you would imagine those little critters will die. And so we do these tests to evaluate toxicity, and we find throughout the San Diego region, we're not seeing toxic sediments. Next slide. And then we've worked with Scripps on their kelp monitoring project. They've been looking at kelp in San Diego County for over 50 years. They provide independent reports from what we provide, but they are considered part of our program, but they work independently on what they do. They provide their own annual reports, all available on our website. I won't get into the details of the program, but in terms of the Point Loma kelp beds, it's one of the biggest in the US. And unfortunately, with the effects of climate change and El Nino cycles, there is a gradual decline in that kelp over time. It comes back, but every time it comes back, it's slightly less than before. So the future of kelp is somewhat bleak. Next slide. All right, so I think this is going to be our last section, so you can play the video. So the other element of our studies is looking at the fish communities. So we go out there, we trawl, so we put these big nets over the side of the boat. We do very quick trawls to just assess in a snapshot what is in that area in terms of the more mobile animals, the fish, the large invertebrates. Similarly to the other testing we do on the small invertebrates, but really here we're trying to tackle what is happening with the mobile animals, because of course they have the ability to move around. Next slide. And essentially in the, what are we looking at here? So with the fish, pre-discharge, post-discharge, and then the current reporting cycle for the plu and sprue, so plu on the left, sprue on the right, you can see there's basically very little change among these. Arguably in some of the regions, abundances have gone up for certain animals, but we just don't see a specific impact on the fish around the outfalls that would imply that the outfalls are driving fish away from the region. Next slide. And then we look at contaminant accumulation in fish. I just put this one up as an example. There are hundreds of contaminants that we assess. I say we, the chemists in the city assess. This is just an example. People are often very familiar with mercury in fish, and you need to limit your consumption of fish. And so this kind of gives you an example that, yes, we do see mercury in fish. But again, coming back to, is there an outfall specific impact that is causing changes in that mercury? And no, we don't see that. We see mercury around the region, and we work with regional parties throughout the Southern California Bight, and they see the same thing. And this applies to virtually all of the chemical contaminants we see. We see various levels of chemical contaminants in fish tissue and liver tissue, but there's no direct relationship with their association of proximity to the outfalls themselves. So. All right, so blew through all that. So that's a lot. It's a lot of information, but like I say, it's a snapshot of what we do. I would encourage you to check out the website. We have reports, videos, all kinds of stuff you can see. All of our data is freely available. If you want the data, go to the website. You can download it, play with it, do what you want with the data. It's all available to you. If there's anything on there you can't get, reach out to us. We're happy to give you whatever you want. We're an open book, so we just, we want you to have what you need to, figure out what's going on. All right, thank you.
I can take some time for questions. First, I'd like to ask if there are questions from the board. So from Dr. Pombal first.
You did an excellent job explaining that the location of the oceanographic stations is set by the NPDES, by the department. Could you elaborate a little bit more about the timing? How originally the NPDES stated the timing, and now with the new technologies, how that evolved, please?
So do you mean in reference to like how the sampling might change over time and things like that? So, okay, right. So yeah, in terms of just the sampling frequency, the program's been going on for 60 years. And in the beginning, frequency, there was much more sampling going on. Just by way of an example, like with the trawl sampling, we used to do those trawls every quarter. And so we wanted to see what's happening every quarter. But over time, we started to realize there's really very little change. We're not really seeing much change. So now we do it twice a year. And arguably, from what we see today, you could probably do that once a year and still get the same findings. And so the permits are on a 5-year cycle. And so every 5 years, the board will review what we're doing, and based on new sampling requirements, they may propose new things. Hey, microplastics. So now the big thing we're worried about, so we need to incorporate microplastics. And we work with other agencies in the interim on all kinds of special projects to look at things such as that might be coming down the road, new contaminants, new things. And so really every 5 years is an opportunity for the board to tell us you need to do something differently, you need to add this, take more samples. And ultimately, it's really the board's staff's responsibility to evaluate the program and determine, is that meeting the compliance that we're interested in, or does something else need to be done? And of course, we do our due diligence to try and, if we see something and we think, you know, I think we could do more here, we'll suggest that. So it's kind of a collaboration in a sense, but ultimately they have the decision-making power. I think he's got the mic.
Good evening. Thanks again for the presentation. Mitch McKay, City Council of Imperial Beach. I noticed in your presentation, you didn't really touch on the significant characteristic difference between Point Loma and the South Bay Ocean Fall, and that's the water depth. Point Loma is, I believe, 327 feet approximately. South Bay is less than 90. You mentioned also that occasionally the affluent does come to the top of the water. I don't know what occasionally is defined as scientifically. Might touch on that. But again, that significant difference in depth and thermocline, I think needs to be addressed in the context of your evaluation. Well, I mean, that's a significant physical characteristic that's different. And add to that the Point Loma outfall is 4.5 miles offshore. Ours is somewhat less. But again, the difference in the water depth is significant, and I really wish you guys would address that.
Yeah, sure. And certainly, as I said, we've limited time to kind of talk about all the details, right? But this is fully detailed in our annual report. So I definitely encourage everyone to take a look at that if you want specific details. But you are correct. In South Bay, the water depth is much shallower, and that's why in the wintertime, there's less of that stratification kind of hanging over from the summit to really keep that below the surface. So I think, I don't know if it was on the slide, but it's approximately about maybe 20 days per year that we see that plume coming up to the surface in the South Bay. But really the key part of understanding the plume is, one, knowing if it rises to the surface, but really, does it come inshore? Does it go offshore? Where does it go? And based on understanding the ocean conditions, we know that it's largely kept in that kind of along shore direction. So northwest to southeast, looking at satellite imagery, looking at the actual data we collect in the field, looking at the real-time moorings, even some data collection that I didn't even talk about today. We use remotely operated vehicles where we take them out and we can actually do transects of the whole region to literally map where the plume is going. All of that evidence, all of that weight of data tells us it doesn't come inshore. It predominantly goes to the southeast, sometimes comes north, and sometimes goes offshore. And it rises sometimes in the wintertime for the South Bay.
Hi, my name is Leon Benham. I'm president of Coastal Service. And I really have to question the photos that you brought up where you quoted that there's no onshore flow, because I think the photo definitely show from the white imaging coming from the SBOO that if that white image is flow, then it's directly going to the shoreline.
The satellite image?
Yeah.
Maybe we can, I don't know if you can go back to that, Frankie, and we can just take a look. Down. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Right there, 17.
So, for example, on the Point Loma outfall, do you see the little white areas that are near the shoreline? And then you compare the plume that is right at the bottom of the Y. That's flow, because in Point Loma, you're showing the white as shallow area, and then it's clear because you remember The pipe is a serrated pipe. It's like irrigation drainage pipe. It has holes all along it and it dissipates. It's called the dissipator. So by the time that raises up, then it's on the surface and then that white indicates flow. The other thing is that the littoral cell is in operation about 88% of the time, meaning that inward current, which is well established. So when you add the fact that Point Loma was moved because it was 2.5 miles from the shoreline and 225 feet deep, we're about 3 miles from the shoreline and we're 90 feet deep with the littoral cell that sweeps into the coast, goes along the shoreline and goes up towards Coronado. Doesn't that picture indicate the littoral cell in action?
So that's a lot. So let's see if we can unpack this. So what we're looking at here is the Y. So only the south leg of the Y is operational. The north leg is not operational. So you can see quite clearly here the flow from the south leg of the Y heading in the southeast direction. Everything else you're looking at here is shore-based turbidity, suspended solids from Tijuana River, northern Mexico. So I guess I'm a little confused as to where you're implying the flow is coming from.
The bottom of the Y on the far right. And with that serrated pipe, I think that length is about, what, 750 feet long?
I'm not sure of the actual.
Yeah, and so it's serrated. So the flow is coming out all along that pipe. And so you wouldn't have a point end discharge, especially at 90 feet. The only time you would probably see it, kind of like the Point Loma, is that if it was coming into the shallow water, which that right side of the T is. And so I just say I'd like that looked at in future studies because that we're being affected by these onshore flows.
So I appreciate the comments, but I think there's a misunderstanding of what is happening in this image. And I think, can you scoot all the way to the end of the presentation? I believe we have more satellite imagery. So if you go all the way to the very end, there you go. Yeah, go, sorry. Scoot back a little bit, back one more, another one. Okay, so here's another image. So same scenario, south leg of the Y. Here, you now have this clear flow coming out of the south leg of the Y because of the extreme contamination from Tijuana River and Mexico that has literally taken over the whole region. Yet the fresh water input from the Y is clearly visible in the southeast direction coming from the Y. Now, what you're talking about is there are diffusers along the outfall. Now, this is down at 90 feet. As you said, as the current travels southeastward, you're not going to see necessarily the direct rise from those diffusers, but we do see that. We have seen that when there's very minimal current, you can see it coming up out of the hole of the Y. In this occasion, you've clearly got a strong southeast current, so it's pushing the current all the way along. Now, there might be diffusers, but the primary source is coming out of the end. Now, this red line also is not necessarily exactly indicative of exactly where the end is, but this and other images, there are literally thousands of images of the South Bay that show this.
He mentioned there was several characteristics about the outfall in the water. First, it's fresh water. It rises to the surface. Second of all, it's warmer than the surrounding water because it's coming from the plant. So there's two ways why it rises. Second, a third is the fecal content is lighter than water, so it raises to the surface. And just because the topography of the bottom of the water, when the littoral cell comes in, when this water comes in, it pushes it to the surface. So if this picture was taken during a storm or when the littoral cell was not working, which is 12% of the year, but 88% of the time it is in flood. And that's why we would ask citizens of IB, we would ask you to look at this and to examine this, because time of year and how much flow is coming out of the pipe is a direct relationship.
So I would say a couple of things there. So in regards to the references to the littoral cell, littoral cells refer to sediment movement, not necessarily water movement. And so looking at the idea of a littoral cell in this region is not necessarily indicative of water movement. The water dynamics in this region are incredibly complex. So we talk about these primary currents offshore creating this longshore movement of northwest to southeast. That's the primary drivers of the plume movements. But looking throughout the year, the seasonality, currents move all over the place. You have the southern swell certain times of year, you have different dynamics. There is a gyre that forms within that region, which is kind of what you're talking about, this kind of circular gyre up to Coronado and within this region. But as I said, the vast majority of the time, we're seeing this southern southeasterly direction. And often, if you go back one slide, often we're seeing situations like this. This is back in January 2024 when we had the big storm in San Diego. Left side is just before the storm, right side is just after the storm. And so in this particular image, we're not seeing the plume at all in this image. In this particular scenario, down deep's not coming up to the surface. And then in this image after the storm, you're seeing all of this from northern Mexico up from the Tijuana River, completely engulfing the whole of the Y itself. So I would just say the dynamics around the outfall and in this region are incredibly complex, but we have looked at this. There's 20 years of satellite imagery reports that talk about all of this. There's 60 years of our reports. It's all there. Like it's all for your understanding and to take in. And like I say, we can provide all the data and everything you need. So it's all there.
Okay, that's it. We're gonna have to move on. We have more public comment to go. We have so we do have a few minutes. The meeting is scheduled to finish at 8 p.m. So we have 10 minutes for public comment. I think your hand is up, been up a long time, and you're gonna have you. And over, you've been here, yeah, I remember you from an hour and a half ago. So.
Hi, my name's Carl Bradley. I'm a member of the Imperial Beach community, and I think Dr. Kempster, what I just heard you say was the cause of the beach closures isn't anything that's coming out of that outlet. So that being said, if such a determination was made, this Dr. Giner question, would we not give consideration in the Progressive Design Build project to an extension similar to what we did at Point Loma if there was data to support it? And what I'm hearing is there's not data to support it. So, but real quick, I wanted to make sure, like, we don't have a representative of the Design Build team here tonight, do we? Oh, we do? Will they be presenting at future? When we say the design is going to go through May of 2026, does that mean zero construction until then, or does the Progressive Design Build allow for some construction to start prior to that? Because I saw there was a bullet point on one of the slides that says updates to early work.
Right. Okay. So just to add to your question, so could I have the consultant stand in the back? Okay. So this is the Progressive Design team. Mike Watson, can you raise your hand? Mike Watson is the leader of Progressive Design Build. So we're really lucky to have him working on the project. The idea is that design and construction are going to be done in parallel. And in June, they will be here to present, to talk about exactly what's in the schedule, what are things that we're going to be able to do earlier in construction so that we can start seeing incremental improvements. Incremental improvements is getting our wastewater treatment plant to go from 25 MGD to 35 MGD early on, right? And what is that time? It's not a week, it's not a month. they're gonna tell me how long that is, but it's gonna be way before the 5-year period of construction. So definitely, those are things that are gonna be going on.
Okay, so, will we, like, apparently we have not submitted our preliminary construction schedule at this point.
That is correct. That will be coming in June.
That will be shared with the public.
Yes.
Okay, and then finally, last question, can we anticipate reduction of beach closures when San Antonio de los Buenos comes online, or at least those closures associated with south swells?
Oh, God. And I am not the modeling expert on that, but I will get back to you on that by the next meeting. We will be ready to address that.
Can we have a question time in advance for Miguel as well? Miguel as well.
Thank you very much for allowing me to have this time. I want to first and foremost thank Dr. Maria-Elena Giner. It is very important that we realize there's a certain narrative here that we have to follow. We have to allow the people here to speak, and I mean rights, because this is an impact, a hazardous impact that's affecting people who live here in these communities. If we don't do that, we're not going to get the answers. I mean, I really appreciate Kempster's. We're not here to learn about what's not. We're trying to find out whether or not our house property is going to go down, it's going to go down, or whether or not gentrification is going to impact community. Those are the things we need to know. So how do we do that? So the question we have to ask ourselves, do we have enough money to take care of this problem? This is a serious problem. Now, we didn't talk about what's really going on. Did we talk about the chemical impact, that's the biochemical impact is affecting diseases that are going through the sewage problem? I don't think so. Did we talk about the fact that the military also it's impacting them? We can spend $5 trillion on taking care of COVID, but we can't figure out how to plug this problem we're having here. Think about that. Think about it just for a moment. Now, we actually put in the last 3 years here almost $1 billion to fix this problem. In 1999, this program was put together for the waste management program. That's 26 years ago. And we're still having the same problem today. 3 years ago, 2022, we had a meeting in Imperial Beach. Or the same stuff we just have right now. The same stuff. We're no better off today than we were 3 years ago. We have $883 million more. What are we doing about it? That's what they need to know. They don't need to know about oceanography. They don't need to know about all this stuff. Half of the people are falling asleep, looking at their phone, waiting to take off. That's what they want to know. I was looking at my watch. What if I can? I put my name to register to be able to talk to you guys. I'm here to represent the people, the community. That's what we need to find out. So I suggest strongly that the next time we have a meeting, not 3 years from now, that we are able to let people talk. We should be able to have an hour of time with people over there talking about what's going on. Answer those questions. We don't want to go to Southwestern College. I want to do this. I have 3 degrees. Southwestern College, UCLA, UCSD, Masters in International Affairs, Advanced. The financial agreement that we have across the board is being broken. Nobody's respecting it. This gate that's being built in San Isidro, that gate shouldn't even be going down. You talk about problems. If something happens to that gate and it's unable to come up, millions of gallons of sewage water is going to go into Tijuana and over here in San Isidro, and of course, you know where that issue area is going. It's going to go right into it. That's what we need to solve. So don't sit here and tell me all this nice stuff. I want to know what are they going to do about it? Is it going to take another 29 years for this? 1961. This is the challenge. This is the challenge. There's no doubt about it. 1961, John F. Kennedy said,
Yes,
we have a challenge.
please,
Why
please.
they go in the morning, right? They took 8 days. Thank you.
That's a very valid point, but we heard about a question that said the likelihood of Mexico finishing their projects, which on its own has a little racist undertone. But the people doing the federal freeze right now, throwing a tantrum, is this country, our government. So do you foresee any risk of actually that funding that was already secured being pulled back?
So under the current executive orders that have come out, our sources of funding have not been identified as being pulled back. The ones that have been identified as not as being pulled out back is the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. Okay, so at this point, our sources of funding are not those two sources.
And then Coronado, Pearl Beach, I'm tired of hearing it affects the beach. It affects the ocean. We didn't talk about the estuary. Here we are having a meeting in Salcedo about this, and we are not represented. Is there a representative of Salcedo on this board? Where are they at? President Biden? Bullshit that they're not here. Okay, we had 40 minutes of ocean, great presentation, but nobody talked about the estuary, how it's affecting San Isidro. Again, we only worry about Coronado, we only worry about Pearl Beach, justified, but what about us? Nobody talked one iota about our community, and here we are having.
So let me tell you what we are doing. So I'm not a representative of this region, right? And in that sense, it's very difficult for me to represent what elected officials are doing for this region. But what I can comment on is that the concerns of what's happening in the estuary is one of the things that we just contracted. We contracted a study, and that could be one of the things that we present in the future that is going to be measuring the water quality in the river, in the canyons, as well as sediment in the canyons. And that was part of the permit that we have with the Regional Water Quality Control Board. So we're going to be looking for industrial waste, we're going to be looking for heavy metals, we're going to be looking for fecal coliform, because there's a lot of perception that in the estuary is certain levels of contaminants, right? So there was, excuse me, can I finish, please? So there was a 2019 study that was done that did a snapshot. And so the idea is that we are going to be doing that permanently over time and start gathering that data, because we are hearing from the citizens that they are concerned about what's happening in the estuary. At some point, we'd be more than happy to do at one of these forums a presentation. And let me tell you that all of these board members are volunteers. Right, and they're doing their best to try and share information. This information, if it wasn't useful for you, it could be definitely something that we can adjust as we're moving into the communities to share information that's relevant. And we can do a reach out to the region to see what is of interest the next time we move. We can do better, is what I'm trying to say. And we have the mayor of Coronado, he's hearing, and we also have a city council member of Imperial Beach. So feel free to reach out to them directly.
I get to talk now?
My name's Steve Egger. I've lived in the upper Tijuana Valley all my life since 1953. The Tijuana Valley has been an awesome place. My playground, our farm. Until about 2000, there weren't really many issues, and then it slowly increased. But in August of 2022, it got horrendous when they broke that pipe down south. The river flowed. My community, my neighbors, San Isidro, South Bay, Nestor, the smell was horrendous every single day for 2 years. Okay, September, the flow slowed down and the stench wasn't daily, every night. It wasn't as bad. But the last 2 weeks, it's increased, and most nights the stench is horrible again. And so in our home, we have an air filtration system, MERF 13 filter, UV light, and you know, the whole ball of wax. And that runs every 15 minutes. And we wake up every morning the last 2 weeks and the stench is horrendous. I'm a member of the Otay Mesa Nestor Planning Group, and our area is all along that southern edge. And many of my community members are asking me, why has it increased the last 2 years? I mean, excuse me, the last 2 weeks, it's gotten a lot worse. If you could answer that, and when the river will actually stop so we don't smell the stench.
So I don't have an answer for you today. If anybody here is not getting their question answers or would like to get a question, Frank Fisher, who's my public affairs officer, if you could leave, grab his contact information and email him that question or any questions that we may not be able to address. I read every single email and I respond to every single email. So please provide that and we will have an answer for you. Okay.
I thank you, Maria. I mean, your honesty, you've come forth with everything that we never heard in the past, and you're making progress. We appreciate it, but you know, we're suffering and we want it as fast as we can. And thank you for helping us.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing the issues that are going on in your community. It's very helpful to me.
How's it going? My name is Jonathan. I live in Coral Gate. I've been living there since 2001. Before the crisis happened with the sewage treatment plant and all that, back in the days there was nothing. So the sewage was just going out into the fields, into the area. It was just a mess. At least now with the treatment plant, it has improved. The problem here has been that we've been hearing back and forth issues between Mexico and the US. $500 million going to Mexico. Right now, currently, the way the plant was operating was that the treatment plant would come in, process it, the cake or whatever they call it, will go back into Mexico, get delivered into their dams, and then it would just trickle right back into the South Bay area. There's been an issue where millions of dollars have been spent. So it's sad that, you know, it's not really getting solved. It's almost like we're taking over the responsibility for what should be Mexico's issue. Millions of sewage treatment gallons of sewage goes into our cities, you know. And if we're buying homes in the area, we're expecting that our council or representatives are actually looking out for our interests as well. But it seems like, you know, we buy these houses, they're now millions of dollars worth of houses that are out in San Isidro. And, you know, but there's more concentration on the Chamber of Commerce and what they're doing versus the residents of San Diego, San Isidro. You know, San Isidro has been coming up from what it was back in the days. So there is a lot more investment. But the problem is the investment isn't getting put into our communities. You know, something that can easily be do or get done now is go out there and clean the estuary. When we go out, we take our boots, we take our dogs. Our boots get destroyed because the sewage is so bad that the black boots turn green. Sometimes you know lose color, pigment, because the sewage is just so bad in there. You know, we've been living there, and it's just sad that we smell it every day. We have to even fix our homes to not have the sewage smell leaking into our homes. I mean, it's disgusting. Imagine having people coming over. You know, you spend all your life savings in a home, and you know you can't even open the window because the sewage is that bad. I mean, something as simple as an easy fix. Trillions of dollars that can be spent just on the canal that runs all the way to the Imperial Beach area. That way we can verify and see what's going on within the canal and fix it, clean it. Now, another issue in Mexico is there was a building issue that instead of going into a treatment facility, was getting dumped right into the canal. So that's something that I would tell you to say, you know what, let's go and look at what's going on in Mexico. address the source. The issue here is that they're dumping from the homes that they're building, they're dumping right into the canal because they're bypassing the infrastructure that Mexico set up. There's a lot of issues there, and I understand. But if they're trying to partner and verify and fix something, then that should be something that's binational, and they should go out there and resolve it together. So I appreciate the meeting, but I wish we had more input from the community to actually address these issues. Because like we say, Coronado is beautiful, but sadly, we're not seeing any improvements in San Isidro or Imperial Beach. A lot of that money goes into those communities that they have on taxes. You know, I understand it, okay? So let's find a way that we can work with the government and state to actually push that money towards areas like San Isidro, Imperial Beach, and all that. Beach floaters are huge for us. They happen all the time. They've been, I would say, we go to the beach until it's closed. You can't go to the beach. It's just disgusting. You want to go in the water. Why would you go in the water? There's sewage. You can see it floating around, you know? So I wish we could actually make a change. So I appreciate your time.
And I'm not sure if I caught a question there, but what I did want you to know is that what can the IBWC do? The IBWC's work, which is why we're here, is to expand the plant, is to get that water out of what is closing the beaches is the transboundary flows in the river, as well as the flows going north from the San Antonio de los Buenos where they're not doing treatment. Mexico's getting their wastewater treatment plant up and running, so we should see water quality improvements. And on the river, our job is to get it out, and that's what we're focusing on. We are very cognizant of the fact that the beach closures have greatly impacted the region, and it's unacceptable. It is unacceptable. I have taken this very personal and have really worked hard to get this up and running. You will see improvements soon. And I really want to thank the community for sharing your frustration that we're having in this, and that we are applying efforts that will benefit the entire region, not just Coronado, not just Imperial Beach, but also your community. When we had trash in the river because of the rains, we brought people from our other offices so that they could clean that up, because we knew that was important for the community. And so what's in our lane, I can guarantee you that we are doing everything in our power to get it resolved. Thank you for sharing. Yes, so I would like to recognize the state of Baja California that is here, and they can talk a little bit about what some of the work that they're doing in Mexico and their commitment.
So first of all, I want to thank Commissioner Giner. She has been working very hard for each one for San Isidro and also for Mexico. She works alongside with our Mexican Commissioner, Adriana Reséndez, and we are very thankful. No, I'm not an expert. I'm just a binational liaison for the state of Baja California, but we want to let you know that we are working as hard as we can. And yes, we apologize. For 30 years, nobody looked at this. Every other government and every other administration decided to push it aside. Finally, we have our governor, Maria-Elena Giner. She started working. She went up to Mexico City. She got the funds from President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. And that is why we have the military who is working quickly. Why? Because every time that you have to go through a budget through a Congress, if you go through the military, they can start working same day. So that's what we have been doing, and that's why we have the military working on our different projects. Commissioner Giner has pushed us from day one. We met last year? We met at the Imperial Beach public meeting, and that's where we had the bet with my boss, which is Secretary Kurt Hornwood. We recognize as Mexicans what has been happening, and we are very ashamed because we understand. I was born and raised in San Diego. I come to San Isidro probably 3 times a week. I understand, and trust us, we are working as fast as we can, but we can't fix everything in 3 years, which is when Governor Avila started her administration. So 30 years won't be fixed in a year or in 2 more years, and maybe we might finish a couple projects, and we're hoping that the next administration will follow up. But she has been working very hard to get the funds. All of her team, they come back up to Tijuana, and we make bets, and we laugh, and we get into fights, and we discuss and negotiate. But she has worked so hard, honest to God, to get this done. So really, a round of applause for you, Commissioner Giner. I know how difficult it is for you. And she lets us know, hey, I'm the one who has to listen to all of you. So we're listening to on the Mexican side, and this really.
Thank you, thank you. I didn't care to do that, I promise you. Because I'm actually quite strict when we go to these meetings, but thank you.
So I do have a question. Exactly how do you guys plan on capturing that river water? Okay, that's the main issue. So what portion are you guys going to divert it into the treatment facility? And as you were saying, you guys have to do a study. We already know the water is toxic that comes straight through the river that ends up into Imperial Beach. And all of us are breathing in those toxic plumes, especially in the portion of San Diego at Saturn and Sunset, where the city of San Diego infrastructure is not up to standard, where it foams up and permeates the entire area with that toxic smell that affects everybody along Dairy Mart and corrugates because of all the fumes of the toxic foam because of the way the river flows. So exactly how is it going to be captured and why do you have to do a study when we already have all the facts in place that it's toxic?
So the study, us capturing that flow has nothing to do with the study, okay? The expansion of our plant is what's going to capture the additional flow. Okay, so I don't want you to walk away thinking that that study is going to hold up that other process. What we are going to do is at PBC on the Mexican side, take that flow and take it to our plant. Okay, so that is flowing, that is moving independently. And in June at our next public meeting, our consultant is going to present how the schedule for that. With regards to the study on the water quality and the soil quality, that is a requirement that the Regional Water Quality Control Board asked us to do. And so it's independent and it's a good thing to have that data. Okay. That will empower communities to really advocate for yourselves. Okay.
Yeah, let me just add one thing to that. So the plan, if you double the plant to 50, San Antonio Los Buenos gets 18, that's 68. Right now there's 75 to 80 million gallons a day in the river. Then we're gonna, the plan is to get the water that is now coming from La Morita in Eduardo Herrera that's going into the river, and that's gonna be removed from the river. So when all those things happen, during dry weather, the river should be dry. And then you won't have smells, you won't have pollution, you won't have closed beaches. 90% reduction in beach closures if all these projects are carried out as planned. Now, there's funding issues for some of those still, but on our side, funding has been secured, at least promise. We don't know about next week, but that's going to happen. That plant will be doubled, and that will take care of a lot of that problem in the river. Yeah, we need to tie it up. Okay, go ahead, Mayor.
Just a couple quick things I want to say. The importance said and a couple of what I feel are corrections. First of all, in regard to the funding, people were asking about the ongoing funding, right? So the money has been approved, obviously, for the majority of the expansion of the plant. But one of the super important things to advocate on, that I'm focused on myself, is advocating in Congress to ensure the ongoing maintenance and construction budget is funded so that they don't break down again. That's important in Mexico, which needs to be addressed, specifically the United States. The ongoing budget for the IBWC, right now, the 2025 budget for the IBWC is not approved yet. It has gone up dramatically the last 2 or 3 years through a ton of advocacy. And for the record, about $1 of that, I'm not sure seems to be a misconception. I totally get the frustration of the individual citizens and everyone, but not $1 has ever gone to Coronado on the sewage issue. Every dollar that we advocate for is going to the IBWC, to the Tijuana River Valley. Coronado's never had a dollar of state, county, or federal funds come to it. So the work I'm doing is to try to stop the pollution and the effects of all of the communities. But in any event, the budget now, it was Congress, the House passed 160 million, the Senate passed 170. It has not been reconciled yet. Yes, if we lose that money, that would be a disaster, especially going forward if it goes under 100 million. So That's what I'm focused on. I just want to make two last brief comments because I do think detecting the water, huge deal because it does is what this is. For water, just want to read something to look at it. The first one, this is from to the county, San Diego. EPA Region 9 is approving the use of the DD test and each action value for each water quality monitoring under the EPA's beach program in San Diego County as a pilot program for California. So my question to you that I asked was, if it's a pilot program, what happens? Is there a time for the program? What happens next when it's defined? As to the second question I asked about, is the DDPCR being used for closures? The answer was no, only being closed each observation, not yet science as with the observation. So this is from the county's fact sheet on DDPCR testing. DDPCR is a new, more sensitive beach water quality analysis method that detects contamination better and faster than older method. This allows the county to issue advisories and closures faster than you need.
Say again?
So it's recognize our department. Maybe give your rest of your. Oh, this is my badge. I know it's something. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Duncan. So we're going to close down the meeting. We would like to thank our law enforcement personnel for being here tonight, and keeping us safe. That could, and the city of San Ysidro for providing this facility. I know it's a little tough parking here, but it actually turned out to be quite a nice venue for us. So thanks for coming, and stay active. We'll fix this problem.
Yeah, we appreciate your work effort.
See you.